We've reached the point of the season where the Chicago Bears are pretty banged up, and it looks like Justin Fields' supporting cast against the Buffalo Bills this week could be even lighter than usual.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your own football franchise? Then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON in the game. On the show today, we look at this Bears injury report this week and what's in store for a pretty banged up roster facing a pretty darn good Buffalo Bills team. We'll start with the offensive line, where you're not sure how healthy they're going to be at right tackle with injuries there, some coming back, some going out, and what the situation is there. Tevin Jenkins at right guard having the scary neck injury, and what that could leave them at the guard position because Cody Whitehair also on the injury report and not participating in practice. Then we will look at this defense. Actually, we're probably going to start with the defense there and look at Jack Sanborn going on injured reserve or being lost for the rest of the season and what that means for that linebacker position. Some injuries, good and bad news at cornerback, as well as one to keep an eye on the defensive line. And we'll wrap up with the wide receiver position, where they were already thin. You've got one player added to the injury report this week after getting hurt in this last game, and maybe a couple guys that are returning from injury to provide some level of reinforcements for Justin Fields. But I do want to start with the defense because Matt Eberflus said will be the end of Jack Sanborn's season after he suffered the injury this week against the Philadelphia Eagles, and they essentially ruled him out for the season now with the ankle injury. I don't believe he was formally moved to injured reserve in the afternoon yesterday, and they signed a new linebacker from the Kansas City Chiefs practice squad, Elijah Lee, and kind of signaled like, yeah, that's going to be it for Sanborn. And what a run this season was for Jack Sanborn. I mean, how far exceeding expectations he did as an undrafted rookie free agent. It'll only finish with 6 starts across the 14 games here. And of course, this last one cut a little bit short, but really looked like an instinctive tackling machine that looks like he has a future in the starting lineup of this Bears linebacking core. It was only 6 games, so I don't know if we're ready to go all in on saying, yep, he's the future of the middle of the defense, because we've seen young guys have early breakouts and then struggle a little bit and maybe fall off completely or just never quite live up fully to that early hype and expectations that they built. But certainly a guy that's going to be in the conversation to be a starter next season, whether that's competing with someone else or whether they give him the job outright. We have not seen anywhere close to the last of Jack Sanborn. I think there's a very bright future for what he's going to bring for this Bears linebacking core. They're going to need Nick Morrow to step up and have another really strong game in his absence. I thought Morrow played particularly well against the Philadelphia Eagles, maybe his best game of the season, despite not having Sanborn there. And it means more Joe Thomas and Matthew Adams at that other linebacker spot. I think both of those guys are limited in terms of coverage ability. I think they're physical and pretty good against the run. Not afraid to take on blocks and be aggressive downhill, but I was surprised Jalen Hurts didn't try to attack them more in coverage in this game, and I'll be looking to see if Josh Allen takes a similar approach or how he might go after these linebackers. I guess it'll kind of depend on which cornerbacks the Bears have out there, because that's a real question right now as well. at practice on Tuesday, because remember, this is a Saturday game, so everything's bumped up a day. So the Bears practice like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for the injury report. It was a walkthrough practice on Tuesday, and so all of the injury report designations are projected. If they had practiced, Kindle Vildor would have been out of practice with an ankle injury. And Jalen Johnson, suffering that rib injury late in the game against the Philadelphia Eagles. Fortunately, he was projected to be a full participant in spite of that, as was Josh Blackwell on the injury report, but a full projected participant in practice. So it's a good sign that Jalen Johnson will be able to go for another big test against a wide receiver like Stephon Diggs. The Eagles had a couple of different options with Brown and Smith. The Bears opted to have Jalen Johnson shadow A.J. Brown, whether he was on the left or the right side on the outside. And we talked on the last 2 days of the podcast about that matchup, so we don't need to rehash that. But it'll be interesting to see whether or not they choose to do the same shadow coverage with Stephon Diggs, or whether they're more inclined to just let whoever's on that opposite side handle it. Because it might not be Kindle Vildor, and if it's Josh Blackwell or Jalen Jones out there, are you more inclined to say, yeah, let's not get Stephon Diggs matched up one-on-one with that player? So we'll keep an eye on that cornerback health moving forward. And then Justin Jones, the defensive tackle, was listed as a DNP due to illness. Typically, illness tends to be more of a miss practice but not miss the game type of situation, although there certainly are different levels of, severeness of illness. So we'll keep an eye on it, but I don't think at this point it's panic or worry about him missing the game just yet. But if he misses all 3 days of practice with illness, that's when we can start to be a little bit more concerned about maybe the Bears not having their full depth on the interior of that defensive line and be even more limited in the pass rush that they have, which has already been a problem and will be particularly important against Josh Allen. And let's not forget their ability to stop the run as well. And Justin Jones really playing the lion's share of the snaps at the defensive tackle position, kind of the clear number one guy on the depth chart there, where everyone else rotates quite a bit behind them. So, we knew this defense was light on the talent. They're already looking at least one or two guys potentially missing with injuries, but at least you got Jalen Johnson seemingly good to go, full participant, and just a little bit nicked and banged up. But let's see how he does against Stephon Diggs, and let's see how the Bears get by without Jack Sanborn over these final 3 games of the season. I'm a bit more concerned about what's going to happen with the group in front of Justin Fields after this offensive line struggled so much against the Philadelphia Eagles. The matchup doesn't get a ton easier against the Buffalo Bills. And your offensive line is even more injured than it was entering that Eagles game. We'll kind of get an update on that group up front and look at what some of the starting lineup possibilities could be in case of potential injuries here next on Locked On Bears. We've got a new partner here on Locked On Bears that I'm really excited about. It's our friends at Ultimate Football GM. It's a mobile game you play on your phone, and I was literally playing it right before I started recording this podcast. Sometimes it's kind of hard to put down because it gives you complete control over running a franchise, and it's even more intricate and gives you even a deeper level of control than like Madden and some of these other franchise type games that, there's some things to like, but they just don't quite give you everything you're looking for. They cut a few too many corners and don't really let you have that truly immersive general managing experience. But the Ultimate Football GM game is the ultimate. It's the ultimate general managing a game. It's challenging, it's realistic, it's completely free and playable offline. So you can play on the go as you want and when you want to. We've got a league among our Locked On podcast hosts here where we're all trying to compete and get our teams to be the most successful possible. Just drafted a big brand new quarterback for my team in the offseason, hoping that can turn my around. So you gotta check out the Ultimate GM game on your mobile device. Locked On Bears listeners will get 100% free boost to their franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in the game store. That's all caps, Locked On. So make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. This episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that I really think you're going to like. That's why you'll be able to find an episode from The League available as a bonus episode on the Locked On NFL channel. narrated by Super Bowl champion and legendary smack talker Richard Sherman and sports broadcaster and rising star Taylor Rooks. The League is an 8-part docuseries about the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories connected to America's favorite sport. You won't want to miss these untold stories spanning from the 1940s through the present. Each story offers equal parts history, entertainment, and social commentary. Head on over to the Locked On NFL podcast channel for a bonus episode of The League, or catch the full series wherever you get your podcasts. Available now. Audible. Get in the game. We don't know which Chicago Bears offensive lineman will be able to get in the game this weekend on Saturday against the Buffalo Bills, because you're looking at some difficult injury situations that we're not exactly super clear on how it's going to look, and also rotation situation at right tackle that's gotten a little bit messy. So I think to start, first of all, we saw Tevin Jenkins carted off with that neck injury against the Eagles that looked particularly scary. And Matt Eberflus was able to at least say after the game that, the signs were encouraging. It wasn't really super clear on what exactly that meant or, how severe of a thing this was, but just more so like the guy wasn't paralyzed, right? Like he was physically not like his arms and legs and everything worked. He was alive. He was conscious, right? He was going to be okay at some point, but it seems like it's not nearly as severe as it looked, because Tuesday's injury report projected for a walkthrough practice had Tevin Jenkins as a limited participant. That was the biggest surprise of the group for me. I was like, after we saw that, I wasn't sure whether that's a season-ending injury or what, but I didn't think he'd be back at practice, even in a limited capacity, the first day of practice 2 days after that injury. It's a good sign that the injury was not that severe, and I guess a good sign that he could play on Sunday against the Bills. It feels hard to believe when you see a player get carted off to a hospital like that, and to turn around 6 days later and play a game that's why I'm hesitant here. It's a little bit mysterious. I don't want to just assume first day of practice limited, and he should be good to go because he's not going to go backwards, right? But sometimes they do. I mean, sometimes things do get worse. Sometimes things take time to sort of fully show themselves as far as injuries go. So I guess cautiously optimistic that Tevin Jenkins might not end up missing a game, because it was going to leave you with some real challenges at the guard position there. In game, Michael Schofield came in, and we know what Michael Schofield is and isn't at this point. He's a solid off-the-bench spot starter at guard who isn't going to be terrible, but isn't going to be stellar either. And if that was all it was going to be, then sure, you're okay with Michael Schofield in there. But the other wrinkle in here is that at Tuesday's practice, Cody Whitehair would not have participated, a DNP with a knee injury. Now, he finished the game against the Eagles, didn't miss any snaps as far as I saw. And so I'm not, it's a little bit unclear when and where this knee injury popped up, or then also how severe it is if he was able to play. Is it just kind of a knee soreness thing and sort of like a veteran day off? You give him that first Tuesday practice off because it wasn't really going to be a practice anyway, but then it's just a rest day and he's good to go the rest of the week and definitely for sure good to go to play? Or was he playing through a much more significant knee injury that obviously isn't season ending or anything, but something that was affecting him more than we thought and maybe contributed to his worst game of the season? And that's what it felt like. He was really getting his butt kicked in pass protection there against a really good Eagles defensive line. So that's important context there. But again, you can't be thinking the Buffalo Bills are going to be drastic. Too much easier. They don't have Von Miller anymore with injured reserve. It's not as deep of a rotation as what the Eagles have on their defensive line, but I'm not going to be the one that overlooks what this Bills defense can do, especially up front there. So it's going to be another tough challenge for him, and especially if he's not available to go. You could put Michael Schofield at left guard, which I would feel pretty comfortable with, but then if Jenkins isn't able to go, then I think it's Ja'Tyre Carter coming in off the bench, the 7th-round rookie, going up against the Buffalo Bills defense. Does not seem particularly ideal there, and I don't think you're going to kick Larry Borum inside to guard all of a sudden, or Alex Leatherwood inside to guard all of a sudden, and just ask him to start against a team like the Bills at a brand new position. I will say that that Larry Borum was a full participant in practice with that knee injury that has kept him out of a few games now. And Matt Eberflus has kind of hinted that, Alex Leatherwood struggled, and we're going to take a look at maybe, changing up that right tackle rotation. Kind of hinted that maybe Leatherwood will stop getting offensive snaps, and maybe Larry Borum will get them instead. And that Riley Reif is also out of practice with an illness. So depending, like much like the Justin Jones conversation, is it just the flu, the RSV, COVID-19? I think they still have to designate COVID-19. I'm not sure, but is it just a little respiratory thing that's going around that he'll be good in a few days and ready to go, or is it something? Again, it could be any sorts of illness, could be food poisoning. I mean, illness can cover just about anything on an NFL injury report. So is he fine the next day and good to go, or is he maybe out for a week because he can't keep food down and doesn't have the nutrition and energy to play in a football game, right? That'll be a big difference at right tackle. If Larry Borom is just the full-on starter because Reef can't go and you don't want to rotate Leatherwood in there anymore, or if Reef is 100% ready to go on Sunday, does Borom still start? Do you split those guys in a 50-50 rotation? I mean, how do you start to handle that if you're taking Leatherwood out of the mix there? It's all really important questions that this Bears offensive line needs to sort through before this Buffalo Bills game. That I don't want to see Leatherwood in there. And I would like to see over these last few weeks, again, like what Larry Borom can do. Because I think Riley Reef went in there more so due to injury. But there was also like the time when Borom was healthy and they kind of kept him on the bench because Reef had been playing well. But, at this stage, what is it, week 15 of the NFL season? Week 16 now? Yeah, this will be week 16 that we just got done with week 15. Do we need to see more of Riley Reef? Like, of course, you don't want to put out a right tackle like Leatherwood that's just going to get Fields killed over and over again. But I'm willing to see Borom again and kind of see if he can develop a little bit more with having had a little time off and now getting a little more experience under his belt. I mean, if Borom's going to get Fields killed like Leatherwood was, you put Reef back in there and you're good to go. But the only reason to play Reef is if you feel like none of your other options are good enough to play. And I feel like we've seen Borom not thrive, but at least be good enough to be on the field, like better than what Alex Leatherwood was showing us. And then it's just a question of, hopefully Whitehair and Jenkins are able to go, and you don't have to have a risk of a 7th-round rookie playing against the Bills, or, if you need to, Michael Schofield can fill in there and play. And that's not the end of the world. You still have, between Borom and Schofield, you might have a pretty good backup at guard and tackle that you can feel like your depth is okay. And one other quick note, Matt Eberflus said Sam Mustipher will be the honorary captain this week, which is interesting given the fan public opinion on Sam Mustipher. I mean, it's the end of the season. It's an honorary captain position. Doesn't really make a difference. Who cares? But it's still a designation that not every player is going to get and shows some faith that the coaching staff and organization has in Sam Mustipher, even in a slight leadership type position as an honorary captain. It looks like the injury news is a little bit more encouraging overall at wide receiver, where a couple of guys could be coming back, even if the Bears might be losing another one for next week. We'll kind of get updates on Chase Claypool, N'Keal Harry, Equanimeous St. Brown, and where that leaves potential benching of Velus Jones Jr. next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Total Wine & More. This holiday, find what you love at Total Wine & More. With so many great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find a new favorite single barrel bourbon or go to the perfect gifts for everyone on your list with some help from a friendly guide. And all with the confidence of knowing that you found something special for the lowest price. I love my local Total Wine & More. I go in there all the time to get all the different interesting whiskeys and bourbons and gins that I love to try. And of course, the wine selection and more. I mean, it's right in their name. Love what you find. Only at Total Wine & More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly. Be 21. We saw how difficult things could be for Justin Fields against the Eagles when he didn't have much talent to work with at wide receiver. And some of it limited the passing production of this Bears offense. And I think it's part of the reason, along with the offensive line, that they only scored 20 points in that loss. But the early signs from the injury report are encouraging to at least get a little bit more talent back in there. Again, Tuesday was a simulated practice. It was not a real practice, so the injury designations are just kind of a guess or a projection of what would have happened. But N'Keal Harry was a full participant coming from a back injury, and Chase Claypool was a limited participant with the knee injury that kept him out last week. Add on top of that, Equanimeous St. Brown was a non-participant with the concussion that he suffered in the Eagles game. He left that game and did not return and seems to be fully in the concussion protocol. We've seen generally this season that when a Bears player has gotten a concussion in a game, it seems to generally be keeping them out the following game. Every concussion is different. every player's body is different, and I don't want that to be like, oh, so therefore Equanimeous St. Brown will be out for one game and good to go. But we've seen them, I think, take a appropriately cautious approach there, and we'll see what it is like for Equanimeous St. Brown. But I think it's at least I'm operating from assume he's not going to play this week and be pleasantly surprised if he does. Certainly with N'Keal Harry as a full participant, in theory, should be full to go for the rest of the week and fully back into this wide receiver lineup. Claypool's a little bit more tricky because I don't fully understand the extent of the knee injury. Because you remember against the Packers before the bye week, there was that play where Harry kind of came down on his knee funny and it looked kind of serious. And he was able to, I don't remember if he limped or jogged or was helped off under his own power there and ended up coming back into the game and played, I think, the rest of that Green Bay Packers game. So it was kind of like crisis averted, you thought? And then bye week, so plenty of time for things to heal up. But then coming out of the bye week, did not practice all week ahead of the Eagles game and did not play at all, despite having played on that knee injury immediately after it in the Green Bay Packers game. And so I don't have a sense for how that comes together. I mean, I certainly am not a doctor or any kind of sports medicine expert on all means. So then I don't know then if it's limited, quote unquote, fake limited for practice on Tuesday. Could it get worse? I mean, it seems like it got worse after the Packers game. So could he get downgraded to DNP again and miss the game still? I think so. I think it's a possibility. But I think you have to be encouraged by at least starting as a limited participant that generally things don't tend to take a step backwards in practice. You don't tend to see the injury necessarily get worse. And it seems more likely that he'll either be limited all week or maybe get back to a full participant at practice and be able to go on Sunday. Because certainly once you take Equanimeous St. Brown out of the mix, you're even thinner at wide receiver without Darnell Mooney as well. I mean, you've got Byron Pringle, you've got Dante Pettis, and you got Velus Jones. And Matt Eberflus was kind of non-committal about Velus Jones's benching and fumbling and whether that was going to be the consequence there. And reading between the lines, Matt Eberflus kind of said something along the lines of like, well, we got to, we're going to take a look at it and see what we want to do with the wide receiver rotation. And to me, that was Matt Eberflus saying, we would like to maybe bench Velus Jones and take some of his snaps away as a punishment for the fumble, but we might not have enough healthy, active wide receivers to do so, that they might just need Velus Jones to play because, I mean, as it stands right now, you had 3 wide receivers, well, I guess 4 with N'Keal Harry, fully participate at practice. Like 3 wide receivers that didn't show up on the injury report this week, Pringle, Pettis, Jones. Harry was a full participant, so you should be good with 4 wide receivers for sure. And then Claypool's maybe a 5th at this point. We'll see what his status is like when it comes to actual game day. And you definitely need more than 3 wide receivers for each game, and you really need more than 4. Like if Claypool can't go and it's Pringle, Harry, Pettis, Jones is going to play. Like they just can't afford to bench him. They need guys rotating in at wide receiver. I suppose they could still bring up Simba Webster again from the practice squad to give them an extra body. They also have Doris Fountain on the practice squad, a former Colts 4th round pick who I think also spent some time with the Chiefs last year while Ryan Poles was there, so knew the GM and the head coach when he came to the Bears practice squad. So, I mean, they could bench Velus Jones and call 2 guys up from the practice squad and fill in some depth that way. But I also don't feel like Velus Jones necessarily needs to get benched for fumbling. That, like I used to cover Paul Christ at the University of Wisconsin, and every time the Badgers would have a running back fumble or something, the thing he would always say, it always struck me after the games, he's like, yeah, like the guys they're not trying to fumble. They don't mean to fumble. They know that they're not supposed to fumble, and they know what to do to fumble less. Like they know that you gotta just pay more attention to how you're gripping the ball, have more points of contact, make sure you have tight points of contact. Like it's not like you have to bench Velus Jones so that he learns that fumbling is bad or that he needs to change his technique. Like I don't know exactly what you gain by benching Velus Jones for fumbling. If you don't feel like he knows the playbook well enough, or you don't think he's doing his job well enough in terms of like knowing the plays and the routes and the assignments and stuff, that's when you can bench a player because, yeah, you need them to be mentally sharp and reliable on offense. But like, yeah, fumbling it sucks and it's terrible and you can't do it and you can't get away with it. But like, These are not, and this is not a child, right? You don't need to put him in timeout for making a mistake. He knows he made a mistake. And most of these players are going to be their own biggest critics anyway. Velus Jones does not strike us as the ego type that's going to think he's, all that in a bag of chips and that the fumble is not a big deal. Like, he knows. So I don't know that you don't need to necessarily just bench him off of one fumble last week. And you saw them keep him in the game after the fumble as well. So maybe Velus Jones plays less than we saw last week. Maybe he's at the very, very bottom of the wide receiver rotation, but I think he should still get some snaps. And I think he needs some snaps to continue to develop as a wide receiver in the NFL. Certainly, we'll keep a close eye on any and all developments with this Bears injury report throughout the week. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel so you're keeping up with any and all the updates you need to know right here on the podcast. We're bringing you that daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. It's our Locked On Podcast Network sports-wide look at all the biggest stories. I think of it as like when you would watch SportsCenter on TV in the morning as a kid before school, when you're just trying to catch up on what happened the night before in sports because you just can't watch everything at all times. Locked On Sports Today, 30 minutes or less in your podcast feed. The biggest reactions to all the biggest games, the recaps, the biggest important storylines across sports with our local Locked On Podcast Network hosts breaking it down. Check out Locked On Sports Today for your second listen. Coming back tomorrow for crossover Thursday with Locked On Bills here on the Locked On Bears podcast. And we'll keep looking ahead to this Saturday game between these two teams. And of course, you have to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.